What's going on, y'all? This will be another episode of Community Movement Builders Political Education class with Zahir Oladuni Mobalaji Ture. Of course, hit us up. We're in the good fight against Cop City here in Atlanta. If you don't know anything about that, just keep checking us out on the Instagram and Twitter to get updates and see what you could do in your community to help support this campaign. It's reached international proportions now at this point. If you want to know more information, man, just hit us up and we can plug you in. So with that being said, this class today is going to be on neoliberalism. In particular, we're going through the chapter of the neoliberal state, as in how the state continues to prop up the ideology of neoliberalism, what it is, and why it's important for us to understand this theory. So to begin with here, we got this video. This is by David Harvey, and he's going to give he's the author of this book too, by the way, if you guys didn't know. And he's going to do a little intro on what neoliberalism is.
Look at the way in which the accumulation of wealth and power is occurring within the capitalist class right now. What we see are increasing monopoly power. And here it also is the interesting thing. The neoliberal theory is supposed to be about individualism and competition, but in practice, it's long been about monopoly power. It's still about monopoly power, and it's increasing monopoly power and centralization. Mergers and acquisitions, which were on hold during the pandemic, are suddenly picking up very fast. Mergers and acquisitions and swallowing up of assets and land grabbing and house grabbing and everything else. We will soon be in a totally monopolized society in which the oligarch will control the media, will control housing, will control the means of distribution, will control big pharma and all the rest of it. So this is the world we are moving into. Here we have a situation in which most people recognize that the economy as it presently constituted does not work for the benefit of the mass of the population. There is therefore considerable alienation from this form of economy and a requirement for the urge to look for something different. Secondly, there is considerable alienation from politics. Most people, and I talk about not only on the right, I talk about on the left, will argue that the political system does not work to the benefit of the population. It is not government by the people for the people. It is government by a political elite, which is for the political elite in association with the elite capitalist class. Everybody has that picture of that is the world in which they are. Now, the response to that is, craziness on the left, craziness on the right, all kinds of things that are responding to that. But that is the core problem. And the core problem is going to have to be addressed, particularly in the condition of this constraint of lack of capacity to expand, which of course is also parallel by the difficulty of continuing expansion in the way that we've been doing in relationship to environmental concerns and environmental conditions. In other words, we are moving right at this point into a situation of monopolization. A situation of monopolization of power, monopolization of class power, and that monopolization is going to have to deal with the fact that almost everybody is saying the economy is not working for me, politics is not working for me, we have to have an alternative. I don't care what it is, give me any old thing, anything is better than what we've got. This anti-elite feeling, which exists on both left and right, and all the rest of it, those kinds of questions are going to be very much on the agenda. This is, if you like, where we are right now. We've got here neoliberalism is not dead if we interpret neoliberalism concentration, centralization of capitalist class power. Neoliberalism is alive and well in that sense, but its ideological configuration, the ideas which support it are plainly wrong in relationship to the experience. Takes me back, at some point or other, the ideas, the ruling ideas are accountable for the nature of the experiences. And the experiences now are radically at odds with the ruling ideas. And therefore, there's a crisis of ideology, crisis of economy, and life.
All right, so that's a short introduction from the author David Harvey. If you don't know who he is, that's a famous Marxian economist. I want to say one of my favorite. He's still some of his stuff is still highly high content or highly dense, I think is the correct word. You know, have you ever read any of his work, Dorian, other than this?
I got one of his. I'm trying to think. I'm pretty sure I brought one of his books. Um, Trying to recall which one it is. It's on my Kindle. Um, Pretty sure it was him. The name sounds familiar. David Harvey. Let me check
It's him and
here.
Richard Wolff is another one. And I know we
Yeah,
discussed
yeah, I know.
democracy
Yeah,
at work.
yeah, I know. Yeah, I know Richard Wolff for sure. I've read a couple of his works. But I
He
think I
has a
got a
book
book
I
like
think called Urban something, Urban Rebellion. Um, but I'm not sure if that's it. But that you're talking about that you got.
yeah, the one like the Richard Wolff. I remember he had a book basically about breaking down how socialism can work in a workplace, um, as opposed to from the top down, like from the state down. It's breaking
Yeah.
down socialism in the workplace. Let's see. Oh yeah, the one from Richard Wolff was called "Democracy at Work: A Cure for Capitalism."
Yeah.
And it has for David here.
Uh,
Understanding Marxism. I think that's Richard Wolff as well. I've
yeah.
read that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and I have okay, yeah, I do got a David Harvey. It's the Anti-Capitalist Chronicle. That's the one.
Oh, okay, okay. I
Yeah,
have
I've read a
another
little bit
book
of
from him.
it.
It's called Rebel Cities. That's why. Okay. But I haven't read that one.
Yeah, I've only read a little bit of it. I haven't got deep into it, but it's in my Kindle.
Yeah, his writing is very high level. I think sometimes that's why it's easier to kind of read Richard Wolff at times, but he definitely
Right.
goes into a lot of detail. Um, you know, and he also wrote Capital. Some of the other books I got from him. I wasn't able to get through Capital if it wasn't for him because he actually does a whole series on Capital. Well, it's like a course, so he breaks it down to different chapters and all that, and he wrote several books on the subject, and so he's been one of my favorite writers. Um, with that being said, this book here has been something that I've looked at for a long time because neoliberalism is this ideology that has taken off since the 70s. And sometimes I feel like it should be more of a household thing. Like people should know like neoliberalism like that, almost as well as if you could say capitalism or socialism. I feel like people should understand what neoliberalism is because of the impact it's had globally. But part of the thing I also wanted to look at and analyze with this reading was the role that the state played also in upholding neoliberal ideology, and even why I think it's a contradiction in the belief systems, you know. So some of my first reactions to the book was it's incredibly detailed, this chapter, and it had some great definitions of what neoliberalism was and some of its development and influence across the world. What's some of the things that you got from the book, or what was your initial thoughts on it?
It was definitely an interesting read. The key elements that he pointed out was, of course, neoliberalism is supposed to be about individualism and competition and market-based economies. And he also pointed out how neoconservatism also deals with some of the well, there's like a neoconservative approach to some of the struggles of neoliberalism or contradictions of neoliberalism. He goes into that as well, which is interesting. It's the neoconservative aspect was interesting to me because the way he explains this, the neoconservative pretty much just says out loud what the neoliberal is, but tries to sort of disguise it. Um, and he also talks about the state in the role of neoliberalism, and how from their perspective, theoretically, they want the state to sort of be out of the way. The state is there only to pretty much create a healthy environment for business interests. Um, but of course, they have to rely on one the monopoly of force that the state has, because of contradictions, and also the state has to come in at times to protect the interests of the business class, which theoretically goes against neoliberalism, because apparently they're supposed to not really be interested in having a lot of state intervention. So he goes into that in great detail during this chapter.
Right. Excellent breakdown, man. It was really good, really good chapter. That's why I chose this really instead of the introduction first. But with that being said, let's go into this first paragraph here. The role of the state in neoliberal theory is reasonably easy to define. The practice of neoliberalism has, however, evolved in such a way as to depart significantly from the template that theory provides. The somewhat chaotic evolution and uneven geographical development of state institutions, powers, and functions over the last 30 years suggests furthermore that the neoliberal state may be an unstable and contradictory political form. Some of the stuff you were just hitting on. And he was going on really, we'll talk about this. According to the theory, the neoliberal state should favor such strong individual private property rights, the rule of law, and the institutions of freely functioning markets and free trade. These are the institutional arrangements considered essential to guarantee individual freedoms. So we understand first, like you were saying, that neoliberalism is concentrated its ideology on individual freedoms, right? But then it also he talked about those contradictions on how even though they want individuality and they want this anti-state and completely free market, that they use the state to come in to intervene to prop themselves up, right? And so one of the things I wanted to discuss first was how does the individual ethics lead to neoliberalism sustaining itself? Like, what are the kind of cause and effects of the ethics, and what are those ethics? You know. And I'll say this since you kind of just went. One of the things we know, like we just talked about, is individualism and a need for people to take a blame onto itself, right? Blaming poverty on the individual, and even taking away state responsibility and acting as a safety net. And elsewhere in the book, they also talked about how even though they promote a type of individualism, it's not the individualism that would say, let's come together and form cooperations or form associations to help each other. But more so, they want people to just stay out of the way and let the free markets dominate. And then when the free markets dominate, it turns itself into a monopoly of corporations and big businesses, right? And so basically, I think some of the ethics allow for the public to blame themselves for things that we should be looking at them for. Right. It allows them to get away with a lot of their bullshit that they've been able to do because the ethics mean earn your leisure. The ethics mean you should be a penny pincher. The ethics means that, they shouldn't be providing education. They shouldn't be providing healthcare or nothing like that. You need to take care of this stuff for you or just stop getting sick altogether if you can, stuff like that. So what you got to say? JD.
Absolutely. It reminds me of the general sentiment that you hear in a lot of let's say socially or culturally in a lot of rap music, and also in everyday conversation when people will say phrases which have ideology behind it, though they may be unaware, but they'll say phrases like, well, we all have 24 hours, 7 days a week to get this money or to make choices. So I don't feel bad for anyone in that situation because they had the same 24 hours and 7 days a week to make choices like I did. It's that same type of thing. It's this idea of, well, it's all on the individual to make the right choices when it comes to them. So there's no responsibility to the broader society or anything like that. So that reminded me of that. It's a neoliberal idea, although I think most people who have these sentiments, they don't think of it as, well, this is neoliberal ideology that I'm spewing. Um, and also to build on your point where you mentioned about their perspective on individual is one that supports I guess market interest as opposed to where if y'all want to come together and do a union where we're against that. If y'all want to come together and choose a different social political order where we're against that as well.
Yeah, and that's interesting point you brought up because people espousing things that they don't really know anything about. That's such a hard thing to get people to understand the wider implications of what they're saying. And this kind of points towards the materialist point of view of that base and superstructure that we went over before, because you have this base of capitalism that's being supported, or that's supporting the superstructure through this neoliberalist ideology that then is influencing the thoughts. It's influencing popular culture, right? It's influencing hip hop that then says this is how you need to view things, and then that trickles over to the audience that's like, oh well, yeah, like what you just said, you got 24 hours in a day, and I hear that a lot. And now that you say that, it just comes in my mind like, wow, I do hear that all the time, and it's hard to even argue against it sometimes because it's like a proverb almost. And you don't ever really think to investigate where it's coming from because you think it's probably has always been true. It's either you think it's either passed down or it does sound true, 24 hours in a day, but you don't ever really think to stop and say, well, why is it like this? Why are we doing like this? And even thinking what's the connection between capitalism and popular music like this, and how even some of these artists I think are buying into the neoliberalist attitudes and all of that other stuff. So that's a good point. And going on to,
Absolutely.
go ahead.
Oh, yeah, and absolutely. And your point about sometimes you don't know how to fight against it. Um, this reminded me of that because I seen this very recently on Facebook. So when I was reading the material, it just connected. And I remember when I saw it on Facebook, I wanted to say something, but I was thinking, well, I be reading stuff. So I have certain information and perspectives that I know if I do say something, people may not be able to understand it, but it's like a
Hello? I think you might have muted yourself. You still, can you hear me?
conversation like that. And but like I wanted to say something, but it was just like, I don't know. But yeah, go ahead.
I feel that. Some of the things, and Ryan, if you want to jump in at any time, just go ahead and just unmute and just jump in. But one of the things that I noticed, I try to just make all of these graphics on my own because I don't even think debating works as well anymore. I used to be a big champion of debate, but now I'm just kind of more or less like, let me just try to form a counter narrative. And I want to go ahead and jump into another question I had, because what you see is that what a lot of neoliberalism has done was it really invested in institutions. think tanks, corporations. We know the game. They buy politicians, or they may buy lobbying groups and stuff like that. But I think that what's really important is the type of institutions that they promote, because they'll buy out some of the highest levels of education, and they'll take over that research department by saying, hey, look, we'll fund a certain type of research that promotes the free market ideology. I took a note down, but I forgot what page it was, because I said they almost invent. He was talking about technological advances. And it was almost like he was saying they get so good at making technology that they make technology for problems that don't even exist. And so I thought to myself, you could invent a problem after that to create a market for whatever commodity that you're trying to sell. You can invent a crisis. You can, through propaganda, you could say, man, this is an issue. We need this. And so
right. He pointed out specifically that the medical industry, he pointed that out. They create medicine for problems that don't even exist yet.
Exactly, the medicine. And that's so big. And to even speak on that, if you think about it, they create the problems of depression, because they totally promote individualism and destroy communities, which could cause depression, that they then want to create new medicine for to sell it to you. And of course, because there's a monopoly on the they take it away from the public sector, put it in the private sector, the money, it's all a big hustle. So, but part of my question here was just that what should we invest in institutions, or like what should be our answer here? Like yeah.
I don't know. I think we should not invest in institutions. Or I mean, we could, but only if we should have a very deep understanding of like where those institutions are solely for profit, or driven by like individualistic goals. I think there's a lot of institutions out there that actually strive to help the people within their communities, or just do things that benefit the people outside of who are I don't know, invested in that institution. I mean, they're a minority for sure, but I think other than that, you have to assume that these institutions are capitalistic in nature, and to a degree they strive to suck profit through people at the end of the day. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't think I mean, I don't know. I think we have to be very skeptical about a lot of these large institutions that run right now, because they have not shown us any sign or indication that they're on the side of the average person, or they have any interest in improving the quality of our living standards and things like that.
Do you think we should create our own counters, like a small scale, let's just say colleges, or
I
to try
mean,
to counter that?
That's an interesting question, because like I've had a really interesting business idea, and it's not unique in any degree, but I feel like in one way it is unique, is that like my mindset is I don't care to profit from it more so than to help the community in a very specific way. And so I think we could create our own institutions, but at the same time, it's like you have to be very wary of not falling into the same pattern of just trying to derive profit from everything. Like you have to have a mission statement or a strong goal that you're trying to achieve within your community or something.
That's a hard question, because when we talk, like what you're saying about money, it could set you up for neoliberalism, because they might give you offers. It's almost too hard to refuse. They offering all this kind of money. And that's
exactly.
probably, yeah. And
like,
especially if you need it, and not only if you need it, but your staff may not even be as aware of the mission statement. Of course, people just kind of go get a job for whatever reason. And they could just be coming out of institutions and work at your nonprofit or your whatever. So yeah, no, I agree that it's a very hard struggle, because they got the upper hand right now, and they could probably just buy you out.
For
Right.
sure. And yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh no, you good. I wanted to hear what you was going to say.
Yes, I'm just gonna reiterate that it is real easy to be co-opted. That's the thing. You have to be very mindful that you don't get co-opted. But honestly, I don't see much else that we can do other than try to build the alternative, try to build the world that we want to live in, which is going to require institutions and organizations and coalitions and international relationships across borders, across seas. I don't really see what else we can do.
Yeah, that's fair. You definitely got to try at least, right? I just, I don't know. I think like capitalism is so pervasive, it's easy for people to infiltrate your institution that you started out a good cause, or even to coerce you into seeing things their way. I mean, so many companies start with like good causes and they receive ridiculous multi-million, multi-billion dollar offers and they drop that shit immediately. Like, all right, I'll sell it to you and you can do whatever you want with it. You know, like it's so it's I even question my own like what I would do in that situation. Like somebody says, "Hey, I'll pay you 250 million for this business idea or something." Like would I say no? Would I really? I like to think I would, but or would I take that money and maybe do something else good with it? I mean, I hate to admit that about myself, but like for real, it's I
Right,
don't
right,
know.
right, right. But we definitely need more people to admit that.
Right, right. You like to think like
Yeah.
you like to think that you would take it and do something good with it. Like you would like to think that, like, yeah, I'll take it and watch me, build. You like to think that's what you would do, but never
Right.
see you in that situation.
I do think if you have a fair mission statement, because I think Cooperative Jackson is a good kind of like a good I want to say initiative or example of like a good goal, and what these institutions could all work independently for. Um, but I know personally, just from sometimes in the movements, like, you may want to buy a property just so you can have event space, and do things, and it all costs money. And that's part of the things that they've done is they've commodified everything to the point where it's like, to even participate now, it's all a dollar, it's all money. And so it even has pushed people out of the movement, right? Because they can't get enough money to sustain themselves, to participate and struggle. As odd as that sounds, because everybody's got to go to work. So it's definitely something we have to really think about. And that brings me to this point on page 69. He said, there are finally some fundamental political problems within neoliberalism that need to be addressed. A contradiction arises between a seductive but alienating possessive individualism on the one hand and desire for a meaningful collective life on the other. While individuals are supposedly free to choose, they are not supposed to choose to construct strong collective institutions such as trade unions, as opposed to weak voluntary organizations like charitable organizations. They most certainly should not choose to associate and create political parties with the aim of forcing the state to intervene in eliminate the market, to guard against their greatest fears: fascism, communism, socialism, authoritarianism, populism, and even majority rule. The neoliberals have to put strong limits on democratic governance, relying instead upon undemocratic and unaccountable institutions such as the Federal Reserve or the IMF to make decisions. This creates the paradox of intense state interventions in government by elites and experts in a world where the state is supposed not to be interventionist. So I wanted to read that part because I think there was another part here where he talked about how they commodify things like the common areas. So like public spaces are being commodified and privatized and taken away from the people. And what I've noticed is really what they're doing is destroying community. They're destroying the people's ability to just be with each other. And I think in history, it's almost like people's ability to come together based on community, whatever organization else, the Black Panther Party, you know, the glory years. It's probably because they were close people in the community, you know, but now they have completely gotten rid of all this. It's like the essence of before you could even have democracy. It's like before you could even have trade unions and all this other stuff, you got to have some connectivity to another human being, and they're just eliminating that part. So I feel like, I could be wrong, but I'm feeling like people don't even want to participate in these things because it's so wrapped up in individualism. What do you guys think about that?
For sure. I was reading something recently, and they were talking about like teenagers now versus teenagers maybe 20, 30 years ago. And the biggest question was, where do teenagers in 2023 go to actually socialize without harassment from legal authorities or privatized like um security or something like that? You know what I'm saying? Like even something as simple as that is not even, you can't even accomplish that anymore. You have to be, it's either your form of socialization is either online, which is also feeding into the individualistic mindset, or you don't have any alternatives. Look at high school sports right now. They're all being that you know what I'm saying? Like there was a study that recently came out that after 2020, schools in low income areas, they had to pretty much subsidize their sports programs and things like that. Like these are the early years where we start socializing with other people, and that's being taken away. It's being commodified. You have to pay into institutions now just to have your kids play basketball or football or things like that. There is now an entry price just to do the most simplistic or engage in the most simplistic social activities for young people. And from there, by the time you turn 21, 25, you've been rooted out. You're on your own. You haven't built the community that you should have built 7, 8 years ago, in my opinion. Um, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's scary, man. It's alienating us from ourselves, you know. You can't even, you join a team, you know, you can't even join a damn little league sports team. You know, it's like everything is this um, you know, individual way to make money. I mean, I think we see the terrible effects because, like I said earlier, it's like I think it's the cause of the Greater Depression, you know, and all this other stuff, man. And I also link it to like all of these shootouts, you know, and like mass shooters, you know, because isolated people being away from community, just over consuming crazy nonsense online, you know, conspiracies, whatever, and really not interacting with people, you know, you become, you know, delusional, you know, and then you're
for
able to
sure.
go out there and kill people and all that sort of stuff. So I think that a lot of this stuff is tied into neoliberalism and like that, and it reminds me of settler colonialism, was the point I was trying to get at earlier, because it's a taking away of land from the indigenous population. It's almost like a hype. It's, you almost settler colonializing the settlers almost, you know, because you're taking away parks and just open space. You know, that was part of the Cop City. That's what really started the Cop City campaign here in Atlanta, was they taking away open space to build a training center there. You know, and you know, some people are arguing, well, they should have built this there, they should have built out there. But what about allowing things to just be free and open? You
Mm.
know, so
Yeah. And I think like a media instills a lot of fear. More, you mentioned a point earlier. I think there is a lot of instilled fear in, well, you know, if you let your 9-year-old play outside, they might get kidnapped. And it's just like if you're realistic and you look at the criminal stats, like um violent crime, kidnapping, rape, all of these things are down from what they were 10 years ago, and down even half of that from what they were 20 years ago. And so it's like, where are we getting this preconceived notion that there's all this criminal activity out there that's going to harm our kids? And I think we only feel that way because there's no safe space for kids, and only kids and teenagers to hang out at,
Yeah.
you know? Yeah.
Yeah. Now, one of the things I wanted to get into is the kind of monopolies around deregulation. Because part of what makes neoliberalism what it is it's chopping away from state laws, like different countries and everything, like, because their whole premise is opening up the whole world for trade, for free, for an expanding market. And what this has done is it has grown to encompass the world into this kind of global market. But it's also reduced state power, which then again, as we talk about, has reduced some of the old, like, healthcare, like public healthcare, public education. It has undermined those things, and it's even undermined states' own power to intervene on its own behalf. And so why do you think that this is a problematic trend within neoliberalism? Like, or do you view this as problematic?
I'll say real quick that from a perspective of peoplehood, of people power, of people sovereignty is definitely problematic because the people are being subjected to transnational corporations at this point. So not just the institutions within your own, not even your own, but institutions within a state apparatus which you reside in, but also these institutions globally. And also in the text, he mentioned the fact that there is this sort of transnational institutions and these sort of like the IMFs and the WTOs. It almost requires a also world government, a sort of prototype world government, because you can't have world international economic associations without rules being enforced. So that by definition logically concludes that there's some type of world government rule structure that also must exist. So I do think that's problematic, which is why you have that sort of struggle between, even within the elites or within the white elites, those are universities, there's a struggle between what they call the globalists and those who are more nationalist space, or he talks about the kind of return of a nationalism that's anti-global. So you got this globalist versus nationalist within the elite itself. So yeah, it's definitely it's an issue for those of us who are trying to fight for sovereignty for the world and particular people.
Yeah. Right. And I was going to say too, on top of that, that's a good point, about the elite drifting into nationalism versus globalism. I was also thinking too about how the corporations the transnational corporations end up taking their jobs, right, and then kind of leaving to countries where labor laws aren't there, or that they've taken away so that the transnational corporations can go over there. And so what ends up happening is you kind of get this like domestic resentment that I think is almost justified, but directed at the wrong people, because it's almost like that Detroit, right? Like the auto factories move out of Detroit, and it creates a type of poverty. And so, but what you see is a kind of influx of other people, because they may have like NAFTA, North American Free Trade Act, right? They may destroy the Mexican economy, and then they might come over to the U.S. seeking like different opportunities. But then when there's a manufacturing center in America that leaves people domestically jobless, it turns into like an anti-immigrant thing. And I think it's almost justified, but then it's like the hate is towards the wrong people. The hate has to go towards the capitalist class, you know, and basically it kind of upholds this tension between workers globally, instead of uniting us in a weird way, because it may end up, I think Marx talked about this, like a competition between workers, instead of it happening almost locally and within the state, or you know, it ends up being global. Now you're competing against people in Indonesia or whatever, you know what I'm saying? And so instead of almost like a global solidarity, it creates like a global competitive nature, and people don't, you know, like each other.
I think like a really good example of that is like, I don't know, America's outward resentment towards China right now, which is
Mm,
you had a strong manufacturing base and you exported that elsewhere for cheaper labor. And it's more so, and it's kind of like, you know, like if more, I don't want to sound judgmental, but to a degree, if certain things were nationalized, this global trade would not be necessary because every continent has a subset of similar or the same resources. You know what I mean?
yeah.
But we we create these alliances and these trading partners and things who we would prefer to trade with just because of political reasons, nothing outside of that. And that's who we serve first, and everyone else becomes like a third or second option. And so now you create this resentment, you can create this global competition for things that are really abundant at the end of the day.
Right.
I mean, I don't know.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, that's it.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And I also want to talk about that one of the main things he hit on, which was how the contradiction of like there is no such thing as almost a free market per se, how they do it, because it creates this monopoly of the transnational corporations, right? It creates a they want the state to intervene when they're in trouble, but you know, or to help them deregulate the government itself, that they want to that you know, they want to take power from the same government that upholds them, you know. The bailout of the banks is a good example of this, you know, and they're almost so dependent on these banks, and they're so dependent on the state to intervene with them, even though their entire ideology is premised on this complete free market. And it's interesting that I read that, because I've also been reading a lot of this freed market anarchist books, and they have this argument about freed markets, and they say if it wasn't for the state, markets wouldn't be able to do this. Well, I think Marx was saying markets, a type of thing about markets inherently is they do lead to this type of inequality, but I mainly just wanted to focus on how the contradiction is there, and how we see that play out, because it's they use the state to prop themselves up, whether it's like subsidies to these corporations, or defending them or any kind of way, or bailing them out, which kind of keeps them going, you know. And it's almost kind of like if the government just said, no, we're not going to help you out, neoliberalism would fail almost.
Not just that, if they prosecuted these bank managers and these people who gamble with customer assets. Like if you
Mm,
look at Iceland, they eliminated this issue years ago. They
mm,
put these people in prison. You know what I mean? They eliminated this whole concept of corporate socialism for me, but no socialism for thee. You know, like that's pretty much the attitude in a lot of these cases is we get corporate socialism, you get privatization on an
mm,
individual level.
right.
The PPP loan thing is a perfect example. How many members of Congress, how many large, medium to large size business owners got PPP loans that they shouldn't have qualified for? When there's a chance to take, um, when there's a chance to take tax revenue and absorb it into your business, they take it every single time. And there's no option for that on an individual level. And no one ever gets prosecuted on the flip side of that.
Never. I think that was one of the things that I know a lot of my I want to say, I'm trying to be nice here, but my state socialist friends would say like they love about China is that they've at least um been able to control their billionaires to a certain extent. I'm not sure how much I agree with it, but I think that they do put some restrictions and have I think locked up some billionaires, or they did something to punish them.
Yeah, from the outside looking in, it does seem like they have. It seems like they have some type of control. Like I know they shut down, like industries or businesses and stuff like that, and they claim or they stated this because they felt like it was against public interest and stuff like that. So they seem to have some type of control, but that's just from the outside looking in.
Yeah, I don't know how much I agree because they certainly open it up. I mean, it's like they have a growing billionaire class. I don't know how much control they have over them, but but it certainly looks good. I don't know 100%, but you were talking about Iceland, and I need to look that up because I didn't know that they did that. I don't know if you got any more info for us on that.
Yeah, I'll drop a link in a couple of minutes, but basically I mean, they went through the same thing we did. Basically, bank owners were taking customer assets, gambling on those through the market. You had a banking collapse. I think they attempted to receive state funds to like mitigate that issue, but Iceland was like, "Fuck no." Or actually, as a matter of fact, I think they even went a step further. They nationalized those banks that failed. They locked the bank managers up in jail, and then they don't have a repeat of this anymore. It's one of the most stable banking institutions in Western Europe right now.
Wow.
These things don't happen anymore. There are so many options to mitigate these issues, but the problem is like the United States just does not bother to prosecute
Why
any
you
of these
think that
people. It's
is?
always, I honestly, you hear conspiracy theories about like, I'm not trying to sound crazy, but like, what if you always hear these conspiracy theories of like, what if our Congress isn't really running things? Like, what if it's somebody else? And I always think like, if that was the case, the number one culprit would be uh banking institutions and just millionaires and billionaires. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying? Like,
yeah.
and they're just like they got other people moving, doing things on behalf of their own interests.
Yeah, the 1%.
The 1%, basically. Yeah, I should have summarized that. The 1%.
Yeah, because I got a friend. We go back and forth on that all the time. He's like, in France, they over there throwing, having a revolution, or they out there in the streets because they mad about something the president said. And he's like, but when it comes to America, man, it just seems like we just don't care. And I'm like, I don't know what to say.
It's an unfair comparison though, because in
Hmm.
America, you can go out and riot, you can go out and burn shit up, but guess what? At the end of the day, none of our jobs are unionized. As a matter of fact, the strongest union in America is probably for policing,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah. And
weird
that's
because
something.
most why are government jobs unionized? It's one of the most stable jobs you can have if you don't fuck up.
Right.
Yeah.
Like you was talking about then in one of the last videos we had, you were talking about how ultimately things here are still just pretty much stable. And I think that may be that as well. So I think it's just harder to sustain movements here because things are pretty much stable and for other reasons.
Cool.
But that's why I think that we also one of our future class, I think we need to talk about ideas. I think that the nationalist movements and revolutionary nationalist movements, I think we need ideas. I just don't see a lot of big ideas that's galvanizing or mobilizing or organizing the people. I think we need to try to bring some ideas to the center that's going to get people incited again. Because I just don't see what's mobilizing people. That's stuff that like Cop City, but uh, Cop City stuff like Cop City or people being systematically killed by the domestic military force. These things get people out, but I think we need something that's more proactive. We need more proactive ideas to get people out and going. But yeah.
I agree with Jadorian, but like if we go back to the France comparison, like I was speaking on unions because these people can take off time from work and they can go protest, they can go burn shit. I leave work at 12 and and I got people pinging me, threatening to fire me and stuff like that. Like there's no protection for the average American worker to participate in an organized manner like that and take significant amount of time away from their work life, their personal life. On top of that, I've been to France. Like they got trains everywhere. You can be from the far corner of France, take a train to Paris, burn some shit and go back home. How
That's
are
crazy.
Americans who are expected to own a car? Each and every one of us is expected to own an aluminum car that takes us from point A to point B, but we don't have it. So it's just like
Right.
there's so many gaps in the American system to even be conducive to like I don't know, an organized movement of that magnitude.
Yeah,
Not
to your
saying it's impossible, but yeah. I
I was
think I
gonna
think it just
say,
takes a lot more to bring it out of us.
I was gonna say too that to that point, the that that geography is different, right? Like, I because I think with that train system that goes through Europe, you know, you don't really have that in America where it's like you can take a train from here, just go all the way up to Canada or go to Mexico and everything's cool.
Right.
It's like so spaced out. Like, to your point, I remember one of the first protests I went to back in like 2015. I was living in Charlotte. Like, I had to get in my car and drive 40 minutes, to be a part of the protest. And then I had to drive back home. And I kind of understand that where it's like, it's like I'm like waiting to get off of work because I'm like, yeah, I'm finna go down, I'm finna go down to the streets and tear up the streets, and then but I gotta go back to work next morning. So I feel
Right.
you on that because then
And you
it
had to
is
pay for
backed up
parking.
by that ideology that we talked about too. Like you said, you're expected to have certain things, and it's almost like man, you can't make it to the protest. That's on you because you ain't got a car, you ain't got no means, and so I feel that. What you gonna say?
Oh no, I was just saying like then you drive into downtown from 40 minutes away, you got to pay for parking. It's just a huge inconvenience.
Right.
I'm not trying to be funny, but like there's so many obstacles to organizing in that manner to and and the other thing about France is like every video I watch, these niggas walking around with batons beating people. And if we put this in an American perspective, these niggas don't carry batons. They got guns out ready.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
It's
That's true.
our police are 10 times more militarized. Our national police budget overcomes entire military budgets combined through several countries,
Yeah.
through entire continents.
Mm. No, that's so true, man. I was laughing because I was just thinking to myself, like, damn, yeah, I did have to pay for parking. Like every time I went out there, I was like, damn, I had to pay $10. It's like you had to pay $10 to go riot, which was kind of crazy. Kind of defeats the purpose. But that goes back to they privatized the commons, so you can't even park. Um, but yeah, no, that's a good point too. The hyper militarization of our police force. They know how to quell a protest real quick, and the destruction of unions and separation of communities. Yeah.
And
Um.
militarization is something he spoke about in a text. He connected
Mm,
it to neoconservatives as a response to some of the contradictions or issues that the neoliberals are having. Um, since the neoconservatives are about class power, um, strong privatization, corporation, they understand that the individualism may cause issues. So their answer is militarization. And he spoke about how after 9/11, a lot of this got snuck into the government apparatus. A lot of neoconservatism got stuck in there. Of course, it started and it was fostered in the universities. But after 9/11, that was a way for them to come in and just, what he described as overreach. As he stated, where after 9/11, of course, there may have been some need to have a response. But of course, the neoconservatives went in and did what most people describe as overreach, and we're still dealing with that to today.
that's why I agree with what you said, man. I think we really need to sit down and discuss ideas. I think ideas are so very important. I mean, that what percent they can have ideas and they have such an immediate access to power to implement their ideas. But so critiquing these ideas is extremely important as well. Being able to stay on track with that. But also coming up with a counter narrative, I think, is extremely important, because without that, we don't know where to go. And that's part of my biggest critique, is we're always kind of reacting instead of pushing forward with our own agenda. And that's actually one of the big reasons why I wanted to get into this text, because I like I like studying the enemy, because you can see how they formulated their ideas, and I'm just like, man, how could we do this? How could we formulate something and bring something new? Because the Panthers, when they came out, were new. They weren't just copying stuff from before, and I think we're kind of stuck in that mode, and we need to kind of break past it and reintroduce something new to the society. One last thing I think I want to bring up is just this part here where he talked about shock therapy. He said the speed with which privatization occurred under shock therapy that was visited upon these countries in the 1990s created enormous stresses that reverberate to this day. Social democratic states, such as those in Scandinavia or Britain in the immediate post-war period, had long taken key sectors of the economy, such as healthcare, education, even housing, out of the market on the grounds that access to basic human needs should not be mediated through market forces and access limited by ability to pay. So I that reminded me of like the fall of the Soviet Union was the first thing that came to my head when I heard that. And how like I think it was like the Russian mafia and just completely took over everything, and how it was just such a quick thing. Like it just so flipped overnight. It was almost like a coup, a capitalist coup happened, because it's like all of these like private corporations just skyrocketed and just happened to take power so fast, man. And I thought about the Soviet Union, but then I also thought of this book. I don't know if you guys have heard of this book / documentary, but I think that this was she was talking about too when it comes to shock doctrine. And if nobody knows about it, I just wanted to put this up here real quick. What she says, the author argues that neoliberal free market policies, as advocated by economist Milton Friedman, have risen to prominence in some developed countries because of a deliberate strategy of shock therapy. This centers on the exploitation of national crisis, disasters of upheavals to establish controversial and questionable policies, while citizens are too distracted emotionally and physically to engage and develop an adequate response and resist effectively. And I watched this documentary. I don't know if you guys have it, but I think it's spot on. Some people call it conspiracy theorists a little bit, but I think whenever you see things like a massive hurricane or earthquake in Haiti, you kind of get a neoliberal response to take advantage of the situation. And then, like I said, you see with the Soviet Union, the neoliberalists kind of came through and swooped down on that. So if you guys haven't seen this is a great documentary. I haven't read the whole book, but I have it. But have you guys watched this? Any thoughts on that?
No, I haven't watched this.
All right.
I'll check it out though.
It's free on YouTube. I think I got on my watch list on my YouTube channel.
Cool.
All right. Yeah. So that was about it. Really good documentary. Ryan, have you ever seen the documentary?
No, I actually I just put it in my browser so I can check it out later. So I
All
definitely
right.
plan on watching it. Yeah.
For sure. Maybe I should do a watch party on it sometime.
You giving us homework? So I guess it's the homework.
Yeah. I'm practicing for my adjunct professor position. So, but all right. So is there any last statements y'all want to make? Anything that stood out from you guys in the book or in this chapter?
No, No, I like how he explained how figures like Margaret Thatcher was trying to um use nationalism to support her neoliberal policies. Um, even going as far to say that there is no such thing as society, it's just individuals and stuff like that. He broke all that down. He had a lot of interesting stuff to say in the chapter.
Again, pointing some of those contradictions. Yeah. Um, that's interesting how, nationalism just has that ability. It's so I almost want to say like it's such a large spectrum to it that it's reactionary on one end, but then it could be super revolutionary on other ends. So and then it could be used by the 1%, and then it'd be used by the bottom to overthrow the 1%.
Right. Then people say we passed the time of nationalism, I mean globalization, but then nationalism is coming back. It's real elastic. It's like,
Oh, that's true. Yeah. Yeah. It's like an ideology that just won't die. And you think about stuff like, what do you think we should use it? Or should we move past it?
I was gonna ask like what's a good medium? Does he go into that at all? Like, can you not be super pro nationalism, but like also I guess you want a little bit of nationalism to get people on the same page. But what's the safe ground with that?
mm. Yeah, my position right now is I'm a nationalist, so it's hard for me to not be a nationalist from my understanding of what I'm using nationalism for, which is, of course, self-determination for African people. Um, I don't know. I can't see myself coming from that as a foundation. I believe my people should have sovereignty, should have self-determination, and I don't see how we can have that without having nationalism. Um,
So I'm not trying to argue with you. Is that truly nationalism? Because to me that sounds like Pan-Africanism to a degree. And so, like your aspirations go beyond your nation. You care about all Black folks and their prosperity.
right, right. Well, yeah, when I say nationalism, I do mean all African people sovereignty. Um, but to me, nationalism is just self-governance. It's how it's that's what it is. It's just self-governance. It's sovereignty. That's what nationalism is. Um, so that's what I mean by I don't just mean, in North America, of course. Um, and Pan-Africanism is more like a umbrella term. It can be used by different groups of people. There's Pan-African, quote unquote Pan-African
Nationals.
neo-colonialists and Pan-African capitalists
Yeah.
who use the term Pan-African, but they don't mean it the way that I would mean it, or like a revolutionary nationalist would mean it.
Got you.
Me too. I definitely a nationalist. At times, I feel like it's needed, especially like in the American context, because I don't. To answer your question though, I don't know if he answered that in the text, like what middle ground that he proposes. Um, but I know for me, that middle ground has always tried to been in having like intercommunalism, which is kind of this a shared self-determination of different nations of people, kind of based on common principles. That's what I've always looked upon as, because sometimes I felt like, when I was in all of these different socialist groups, I almost felt like they were all lives matter, but they just said class consciousness. you know
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
because they would say things like, that is, well, all everybody matters, it's class, comrade, and I'll just be like, yeah, but there's different things affecting us, and so I kind of felt them almost to be no different than Democrat and Republicans. It was a group, when that uprising happened in Charlotte, they came down there, a communist party, and they came down there and they were just like, yeah, this is all class, this is da 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 da, and they weren't really winning the people over. But I sat there and had a conversation with them about all of this. That's what I'm thinking about mostly, and I kind of viewed it as kind of leeching off of kind of a Black struggle to a certain extent. But I think that they meant well. But that's why I'm a nationalist, because I feel like there has to be a sort of self-determination with each group. So yeah.
That's fair. I was genuinely curious, so I'm not trying to, you know.
What about you? What do you how would you feel?
You know, honestly, bro, I don't have an answer to this question right now. I'm still learning. That's why I asked the question. I put it out there to see what y'all are on. Your answer makes perfect sense, though. I think, uh, I think what you said in the last part was you kind you encounter groups who take away this rhetoric from other groups, and it just doesn't really apply. Like, this is a class struggle, and it's just like, yeah, a little bit. I mean, it's a little bit of that, but there's more to it, and you have to get a little bit deeper than that. And so I can totally understand how um your stance behind nationalism, it, you know, that makes sense. But
Cool.
I don't know. I have to do more. I have to do more reading and research on my own, to be honest with you.
Well, you follow along here. We're gonna eventually get to all these topics.
Hey,
So
man, that's why I'm here. I'm here to learn more than anything. So yeah, sure.
all right, man. It's a good class. That's about it. Keep it short, man. It was a good discussion, man. Thank you guys for coming once again. And just keep your eye out for the next reading. Unless you guys got some ideas. And you just talked about ideas, and I just threw away the paper.
Yeah. I think we do need to talk about ideas. And I'm just talking in generally. I know you have a particular idea that you've been working on. I don't know if you're ready to put that out in public. But I found that idea pretty interesting. But ideas. I think that we need exciting, interesting ideas because I do see a lot of different groups building collectives and institutions. I see that happening, but it's sort of just generally the same thing. It's about building institutions, building collectives, building coalitions, and that's fine. But I do think there needs to be some greater ideas attached to that, and I'm not sure if I see any that are at least glaring that I can point to. So I would be interested to think about what some of those ideas may be that can be attached to these institutions and coalitions and collectives that are being built and organized.
All right. Cool. Sounds good. All right. And here's I found it on YouTube. So before we go, you guys want to check out this documentary, it's here on YouTube. And I'm gonna drop it in the chat here for you guys. And there you go. So check that out, man. It's a good documentary. And peace out.
Peace.
Is not just what happens to us when something bad happens. It's what happens to us when we lose our narrative, when we lose our story, when we